Part 60. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Zhu. Chapter 593. Just as Mu Yangling was about to leave, he stopped when he heard the words, turned back and smiled and said, "Sister-in-law, we are just sisters-in-law, and the third master and the emperor are still brothers. Why doesn't he ask the emperor himself?" A cold light flashed in Mu Yangling's eyes, and he said, "Otherwise, how about I mention it to the emperor after I enter the palace and ask him to talk to the second and third masters?" Xiao Wu's complexion turned pale, and she looked at Mu Yangling with some viciousness in her eyes. Mu Yangling snorted coldly, turned to Wang Ma and said, "Keep a close eye on the door, don't let people think that we are soft persimmons, dare to sneak in anything that is dirty." "Yes," fourth Grandma Wang Ma bowed her head in response, and as soon as Mu Yangling and the others left, she turned around and smiled at Xiao Wu. "Third Grandma wants to go shopping in the garden? Then you go slowly, the slaves will go back first." After finishing speaking, people ordered Zayahua courtyard to be locked up, and all the maids and women were locked in the courtyard. Xiao Wu was so angry that his chest heaved unsteadily, and he pointed at the gate of Zayahua courtyard, speechless. I thought that Mu Yangling, who was always silent, would be easy to handle. Who knew that a dog that would bite would not bark, but she underestimated her. This matter was reported to MRSU in real time, and MRSU leaned on the chair with a sad face. "Second Grandma, fourth Grandma's words are too impolite, they are all a family, and we will see each other when we look up." Su said irritably, "Now she is the princess of the county, and the palace of the county prince has been sealed. How can we, who are of no rank or rank, look up and bow down to her? The Qi family no longer has the so-called division of the family, and everything depends on Qi Ziyuan's intentions. If he entrusts Qi Shaosheng and Qi Xiaotai, he will have his own country to allocate houses, lushan, etc. to them. What is a family business?" But from Mu Yangling's attitude, Su knows it's not good. She is a little irritable now. The mother-in-law and the second and third masters seem to have offended Qi Ziyuan brothers too much back then. Don't let them not even get a prince in the end. That's a joke. As Qi Ziyuan's biological brothers, Qi Shaosheng and Wu's agreed that at least they should be crowned princes. Qi Heiran is the county king, so they felt that being Qi Heiran's elder brother should not be too bad. The only difference is that Qi Heiran has real power. And they have no real power. But they feel that such things as real power can be won slowly, and the identity should be confirmed first. But Qi Ziyuan didn't entrust them for a long time, so they couldn't help being anxious. However, Su felt that, considering the relationship between the two parties, the Duke of the State was already the best reward. Wu Shi and her two sons have the same desire, but deep down, like Su Shi, she feels that the possibility of the Duke is greater. But they haven't waited for the imperial decree. Since Qi Ziyuan ascended the throne in June, all the meritorious officials were distributed before July, and now the imperial edict conferring on Mu Yangling has come down, and they still haven't found anything. Mu Yangling's imperial edict was issued together with Qi Heiran's imperial edict, which shows that the royal family attaches great importance to Mu Yangling. Mu Yangling is De Qi's first imperial edict, and the queen has not conferred any imperial edicts. It took 2 or 3 years to get the imperial edict, but before that, Mu Yangling got the imperial edict, not only the first one in Daqi, but also the first one in all dynasties to receive the imperial edict before the founding queen. Qi Heiran led Mu Yangling to receive the decree in the atrium, and after the decree was over, he asked the servants to entertain the decree. But the servant didn't dare to take it too seriously, bent down and said with a smile, "Congratulations to the king and concubine, the little one has finished announcing the decree, and it's time to report back to the emperor, so I dare not stay for a long time." Qi Heiran rewarded him with a purse as usual, and said with a smile, "Go back and tell elder brother, tomorrow I will bring the princess into the palace to thank you." The servant responded with a smile all over his face, and took 3 steps back before turning around and retreating. Qi Heiran showed Mu Yangling the golden imperial edict, and said with a smile, "I will confess later, this is the first imperial edict you earned, sir. Just wait, in a few years, we will exchange another edict." Just turned around and saw Mrs. Wu standing at the second gate. Wu looked quietly at the imperial decree in their hands, looked up at Qi Heiran for a while, then turned and left. Qi Heiran's face darkened, he snorted coldly, and pulled Mu Yangling back. Mu Yangling said softly to him, "We are happy on this day of great joy, why are you angry with them?" "Who are they showing that dejected face to?" Qi Heiran said angrily. "You also said that this is a day of great joy, what does it mean to come to the Lord to make a dejected face at this time?" "That's because they were in a hurry. Now that the imperial edicts have come down one after another, the eldest brother has handed over the clan to the elders of the clan to take care of them. Even if they don't care about them, they feel uneasy, so they want to make you unhappy. If you really want to get angry, isn't that in their favor? Let's be happy with ourselves and piss them off." As he spoke, Mu Yangling ordered Li Shun to say, "I'm very happy today, everyone in our yard will be paid 4 times their wages, and everyone in the house will be paid 4 times their wages twice. Pass it on, ask the big kitchen to make more delicious food tonight, send some to the East Mansion, and say that 4th Master invited them to have fun together." Li Shun responded with a smile. Mu Yangling turned his head and said, "How about it, are you not angry now?" Qi Heiran let out a hum, and his anger dissipated. But the people in the East Mansion were trembling with anger, and Mrs. Wu simply swept all the food on the table to the ground. She glanced at the servants below, and said coldly, "Why, this is planning to find another master, to climb higher branches." The servants knelt all over the room, and Mrs. Wu hurriedly dismissed them all, saying, "Ma'am, it's better for us to keep a low profile at this time. What good will it do us to fight against 4th Master?" "What do you know?" Wu shouted, "when did I suffer this wrong? She didn't dare to do anything to me even when Zhu was here. I am their stepmother now, and it is unfilial for them to do so. I used to read seeing that the 2nd and 3rd masters have a lot of affection, they think I'm afraid of them. I'm their stepmother." Wu Shi yelled out, telling herself the same in her heart, as if she was really Qi Ziyuan's stepmother. Su lowered her head. She knew that Wu had been irritated to the point of losing her mind. Whatever she said at this time would irritate the other party. Because the matter of conferring rewards was verbally discussed in the court last month, and now it is just an edict to let them move into the feudal noble mansion. The edict has been read out. So at this time, the entrustment of the Wu family and others must also be put on the table, because not everyone is willing to see the emperor's smooth sailing. First, an old minister first proposed to welcome the Empress Dowager into the palace, and then someone immediately raised the question of Qi Shaosheng and Qi Shaotai's rank. Qi Ziyuan looked down at them, and said with a slight smile, "If you don't tell me, I will almost forget that my mother clan has not been divided yet." The courtier who put forward his opinion skipped a beat, and heard the emperor sigh, "I was only 5 or 6 years old when the queen mother passed away. 20 years have passed, and I don't even remember what she looked like." The old minister who came out wanted to say that this Empress Dowager was not that Empress Dowager, he was talking about the Wu family, but he didn't dare to interrupt the emperor's words at this time. Not only did the old ministers who stood up for the Wu family dare not, but all the courtiers below were silent. The emperor's silence during this period has already represented his attitude towards the Wu family's mother and son. Who would dare to interrupt when he mentioned the birth mother, and instead mentioned Wu mother and son? The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Zhu. Chapter 594. Qi Ziyuan lowered his head, his eyes were clouded, as if he was recalling, "Although I don't remember the appearance of the Queen Mother very much, I always remember how she cooked mung bean soup for me on a hot day. King Rongjun was not born at that time. She can still hold me in the basa for the summer, and now, I can still remember her smile. Chi Xiuyuan's face was serious, and he said, the posthumous titles of the first mother and the first and last are indeed about to be drawn up. Chen Qing, I will hand them over to you at this time, and the Ministry of Rights will try to come up with a charter. Chen Fang came out and bowed down. What else do you want to start? The old minister was entrusted by the Wu family. He hesitated for a moment before stepping out and continued, Your Majesty, since the posthumous title of the ancestors has also been discussed, the placement of the Wu family should also be put on the agenda. I wonder how the emperor plans to arrange for the Wu family. Chen Fang was silent for a moment, then came out and said, Your Majesty, the second Lord Qi and the third Lord Qi have not yet divided their titles. The state affairs were busy before, and since the issue of the Wu family is brought up today, it is better to discuss the division of the royal family together. People's hearts. In Chen Fang's view, the emperor has shown his attitude by delaying the matter for so long. Good words come. Chi Xiuyuan also thought about it in the same way, so this time he didn't excuse his busy state affairs. He also reiterated just now that his mother's family is the Zhu family, not the Wu family. How do you think they should be arranged? The veteran looked around and found that no one made a sound. He was annoyed in his heart, so he had to bow his head and said, going back to the emperor, I thought I should welcome Mrs. Wu into the palace. Now that there is no owner in the harem, the queen mother can take care of it for a while. Chi Xiuyuan laughed softly, and looked down at the old official. He is an old Hanlin. Chi Xiuyuan remembered his resume. He was 27 years old and now he is 48 years old, but he is still a Hanlin. Rank 5, Chi Xiuyuan finally knew why. Chen Fang is the minister of the Ministry of Rights, and his position is too high, which prevented him from turning around to take a closer look at that idiot. Now he just lowered his head, secretly rolled his eyes, and continued to stare at his toes without speaking. Chi Heiran was furious, and almost as soon as the old Hanlin's words fell, he jumped out and said, What kind of queen mother is Wu? But I have a concubine, and there is no emperor to entrust you, but you are calling the queen mother, could it be, what's the benefit of taking her? Old Hanlin blushed, and said angrily, Wang Rongjun said carefully, there has always been no objection to the entrustment of the queen mother. The Wu family is the heir of the Prince of Qi, the emperor's stepmother, isn't it natural for him to be the queen mother? Chi Heiran sneered and said, Who said she is our stepmother? The document in the Yamen says it is a concubine, and a concubine is still a concubine. Old Hanlin's face was blank, and he asked, How could it be a concubine's room? Didn't the Qi family always regard her as their mother? Chi Heiran looked at him contemptuously and said, That's because my father thought she had meritorious service in childbearing, and let the servants in the mansion call her. My maternal family, Mrs. Zhu, doesn't recognize it. Strictly speaking, it is very strict for a concubine to be promoted as the main wife. It is necessary to obtain the letter of approval from the first wife's natal family. Marriage is good for having two surnames. Under normal circumstances, as long as the man pays a certain price, the woman's natal family will mostly agree to write a letter of consent because the woman has passed away and in order to prevent the two parties from becoming enemies. Back then, because there were still two nephews in the Qi family, the Zhu family wanted to write a letter of approval even though they were in grief. It was Chi Xiuyuan who asked his uncles Zhu Qing and Zhu Feng not to write the letter of approval. Chi Xiuyuan remembered things early. Although he was not yet 6 years old at the time, he remembered that his mother was weak but not dead after giving birth to his younger brother. He knew that his mother was pissed to death by his father and the Wu family. His mother didn't want Wu to be his equal wife before he was alive, so how could he let Wu become his stepwife after his mother's death? Therefore, despite the danger that he and his younger brother might be abused, Chi Xiuyuan still insisted not to allow Zhu's family to write a letter of approval, and then, Zhu's family and Qi's family turned against each other, and Qi's family had no contact with Zhu's family for more than 10 years. And the lives of him and his younger brother were indeed greatly affected. Fortunately, the Xia family lived in the capital, and took them to live there for a period of time from time to time. Well, brother Qi Ziyuan won't be living too hard. But Qi Ziyuan will never forget the kind of life where there is no carbon in winter, no ice in summer, and the food is either cold or overnight. Qi Ziyuan looked at His Highness's indignant younger brother, feeling dazed for a while. In fact, he could bear all these things. No matter how bad the Qi family was, it was still his home. He never thought of leaving this family, and even made trouble to the point where he almost broke with his father. Even if he has to be hungry sometimes, he still has a little bit of admiration for that father, but they absolutely shouldn't attack Qi Heiran. Qi Ziyuan had already forgotten his mother's face, but he hadn't forgotten how his younger brother was lying on the ground covered in injuries. The Xia family often visits them, or takes them to live in the Fan residence for a period of time, but that period of time will not exceed 5 days. After all, the Qi family is still there, and the Xia family can't do too much, or they will suffer in the end. There are still 2 children. It was after Qi Heiran's wet nurse abused Qi Heiran that Qi Heiran lived in Fan's house for a long time. At that time, Qi Ziyuan was young. Although he loved his brother dearly, his energy and experience were limited, and he had to study during the day, so he could only visit him frequently. My impression was that my brother was crying a lot at that time, and the child who was just born would cry all day and night. The loud noise made Qi Ziyuan feel distressed, but sometimes he couldn't help being irritable, but his younger brother was just out of the moon, so he couldn't blame him for the small lump, he could only coax him. Once, my husband had something to leave school early. Qi Ziyuan will always remember that day. He bought a rattle excitedly and ran back, and when he entered the yard, he heard his brother crying, but there was no servant in the yard. Little Qi Ziyuan just frowned, and hurriedly walked in, and when he reached the door, seeing the scene inside, he felt the blood flow backwards all over his body. It was freezing cold, and even breathing was difficult. The little Qi Heiran was stripped clean and thrown on the ground, with pinched bruises on his white and tender arms and waist, while his wet nurse was sitting drinking tea, frowning at the crying little man on the ground. At that time, Qi Ziyuan's mind went blank, and when he came back to his senses, the wet nurse had already been smashed to death by him with a bench. That was Qi Ziyuan's first real murder, and he was only 6 years old at that time. The manpower left by MRS Zhu was still available. Almost immediately after the accident, someone sneaked out of the mansion to notify MRS Xia. Because of this, Qi Heiran was able to live in Fan's house, and Qi's family became his occasional place to stay. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 595. Because of this, Qi Feng felt that the eldest son was vicious and merciless, and the little affection between father and son was also wiped out. In addition, the Zhu family and the Xia family took advantage of him because of this matter, which made him lose face in front of the 2 families, and had to put his youngest son in the care of the Fan family. He was even more annoyed at Qi Ziyuan, who made this matter worse, so Qi Ziyuan's life became more and more difficult after that. That kind of discomfort is not physical, but mental. Since then, although the Qi family will not lose Qi Ziyuan's role, they have isolated him mentally. His father was indifferent, and Qi Shaosheng, who was about the same age as him, led his servants to verbally abuse him, and the servants ignored him indifferently. Even the husband who invited him to teach him felt that his thoughts were too vicious and unbearable. Qi Ziyuan, who was only 6 years old, was almost carrying through that catastrophic day alone. If it wasn't for his younger brother getting healthier and stronger, Every time he went to Fan's mansion, he would see him scrambling around vigorously, and his mind was strong enough. Chi Xiuyuan would have been tortured by the Qi family's spirit and collapsed long ago, and his growth was crooked. It's not that the Zhu family didn't want to take the two children into the Zhu family's upbringing, but Qi Feng was their father, and the nanny was left behind by the Zhu family. On the premise that the person was killed, they couldn't come up with any definite evidence. Putting Qi Heiran in the Xia family's upbringing was already the best result of their game with the Qi family. Therefore, the Zhu family could only care about Qi Xiuyuan from the side, calling people to deliver things to Qi Xiuyuan every now and then, and asking Xia to call people to Fan's residence to take care of him from time to time. It wasn't until Qi Xiuyuan was 8 years old that he realized that his father suppressed his thoughts, so he resolutely abandoned literature and took up martial arts, and wrote to Zhu Qing, asking Zhu Qing to hire him a martial arts master. After that, Qi Xiuyuan stopped studying and concentrated on practicing martial arts with his master. In the end, Zhu Jie couldn't see it, so he hired another scholar to teach him, so he didn't become a complete martial arts master. Qi Heiran didn't know about these entanglements. He was too young at the time, and he was too late to understand. He didn't know if it was because of the abuse he suffered when he was a child. Fan Zijian could read 1,000 words at the age of 3, and at the same age, he couldn't even speak fully. Well, Qi Xiuyuan could read 100 characters when he was 3 years old. When Qi Heiran grew up a bit, seeing that although he was angry on the face, he kept trying to get his father's approval, Qi Xiuyuan was even more reluctant to tell him those things. Therefore, except for the two uncles of the Zhu family and the Xia family, Qi Xiuyuan's hatred for the Qi family is probably known to no one. He hates Qi Feng, but Qi Feng is dead. He hates Wu Shi, but Wu Shi is still alive. And now that he holds the supreme right, he still has a lot of time to take revenge on her, to repay what she did to his mother, him, and younger brother back then. Looking at Qi Heiran and Lao Hanlin who were arguing together below, Qi Xiuyuan was extremely thankful that he prevented Zhu's family from writing the letter of approval back then. Because of this, even if the Wu family was included in the genealogy, their name was still not right. A chill flashed in Qi Xiuyuan's eyes. He waved his hand to interrupt the dispute between the two, turned to the minister of the Ministry of Officials and said, "Do you still have the documents and files of the previous dynasty?" The minister of the Ministry of Officials came to understand, bowed, and said, "Go back to the emperor, keep everything, you can check. Then go and investigate," the emperor said casually. "If you don't understand anything, you can go to the Qi mansion to ask Mrs. Wu." He casually ordered a few officials from the Ministry of Rights and the Ministry of Officials, and then ordered 2 Hanlin officials. A total of 4 people went to the Qi mansion and said, "Go and ask Mrs. Wu, whether she is a wife or a concubine, what proofs do you have, and show me all of them." Qi Xiuyuan smiled and said, "When my mother passed away, I was still young, so I can't remember many things, but I remember that the Zhu family's uncle has repeatedly stated that Wu is not a concubine, and I also want to see whether the Zhu family wrote it or not. Submit the letter of approval." As soon as these words came out, it was equivalent to stripping Wu Shi naked in the sun, and it was also the first time Qi Xiuyuan verbally expressed his suspicion and disgust towards Wu Shi. The old Hanlin's heart trembled. He knew that things were going to the bad side. He was one of the 2 Hanlin ordered by the emperor. Before he became an official, he was a 4th-rank official, but now it seems that he has taken the wrong path. Because the emperor had to wait for the reply of the 4, the early court was delayed. Mornings are always very early, and they all start before dawn. Everyone comes just to fill their stomachs, and they are inevitably hungry at this time. When Qi Xiuyuan saw it, he asked Ye Shufang to send some snacks to the side hall, so that the officials could rest for a while. Everyone can't help but thank the emperor for his great grace. Qi Xiuyuan waved directly to Heiran, saying, "Heiran, come with me." Everyone didn't expect Qi Xiaoyuan to be so fond of Qi Heiran, and he didn't let the servant pass on, but directly called to the back. People with sharp ears noticed that Qi Xiaoyuan used I instead of Zhen in Qi Heiran, and all side Qi Heiran's favor. In contrast, Qi Shaosheng and Qi Shaitai, who are also the emperor's younger brother but have not been entrusted so far, seem to be ignored. As soon as Qi Heiran followed Qi Xiaoyuan into the apse, he no longer hid his emotions, and said with an angry face, "The old Hanlin was obviously bought by the Wu family. They dare to intervene in the court now, and they will pay back in the future? Brother, it must not be like this, pamper them." Qi Xiaoyuan smiled and said, "Okay, after this incident, even if they want to intervene in the court, no one will listen to their orders. Why do you think I suppress this matter again and again? The purpose is to suppress their arrogance. Mrs. Wu is the person who is the least qualified to tell De Qi what to do." Speaking of this, Qi Xiaoyuan's face turned cold. During this time, Wu's mother and son were too complacent. Everyone knows that Qi Heiran is not on good terms with Wu's mother and son, and also knows that Qi Xiaoyuan is not on good terms with his father, but they don't know how Qi Xiaoyuan is with Wu's mother and son. Because Qi Xiu has been away from Beijing for too long, except for those who care about him, who would remember his relationship with his stepmother and brother before the age of 14. Qi Xiaoyuan and Qi Feng have a bad relationship. Didn't they rebel because of their father, although everyone didn't really believe it? Moreover, even if Qi Xiaoyuan doesn't like his stepmother, then Qi Shaosheng and Qi Shaitai are also his brothers with the same father, and they are close relatives by blood. This is the Qi family's world, and those two are the royal family. With no way to please them, they could only please those two. There is no way. Li Jinghua has already moved into the imperial palace. Li's family is far away in Jingzhou mansion. Mu Yangling doesn't go out and doesn't socialize. Qi Heiran is too busy to touch the ground. He could have flattered Fan Zijian, but Fan Zijian is busier than them. And as Qi Xiaoyuan's serious family, the Zhu family is still stationed at the border and has not returned. At this time, only Wu's mother and son can be courted. The royal family is always awe-inspiring. Many people don't consider the relationship between the emperor and Wu's mother and son. In their view, Qi Shaosheng and Qi Shaitai are the emperor's younger brothers, and Wu is the emperor's stepmother. It's worth pleasing. Therefore, during that time, although Wu's kept a low profile, there were quite a few people who gave them gifts. Qi Xiaoyuan didn't know whether they would promise anything, but he knew that their identities were a sign. Among other things, a county magistrate wanted to be promoted, so he flattered Qi Shaosheng, turned around and told the magistrate that he was Qi Shaosheng's retainer. Even if the magistrate knew that Qi Shaosheng had no real power, and even knew that he had no feelings for this younger brother, it would probably hinder Qi Shaosheng's royal family. To give convenience to the other party. That's why Qi Xiaoyuan left them alone. He let them enjoy only a false name, and they were not even allowed to obtain the benefits brought by the false name. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 596. The 4 members of the old Hanlin came to the Qi mansion for questioning. It can be said that they stomped Wu's face on the ground and peeled off her skin. Not only her, Qi Shaosheng and Qi Shaitai's identities as the legitimate sons were also questioned. The Qi family became the royal family by relying on Qi Xiaoyuan, so naturally they acted according to his face. When asked about the events of the year, they all said that it was to make Qi's mother happy, so they recorded the Wu family as the stepmother, but in fact they did not get the family name. According to the consent of the elders, they should still refer to the Yamen documents. And the documents kept in the Yamen are still the concubine letter written by Qi Feng the Wu. Seeing this, Wu vomited out a mouthful of blood and passed out. Qi Shaosheng hugged her and cried loudly, asking, if elder brother doesn't want to recognize his mother and just say it, why bother to force her like this? The patriarch of the Qi clan couldn't let Qi Shaosheng slander Qi Xiaoyuan so much. He hurriedly scolded, Presumptuous, this is all the truth. The emperor didn't remember when he was young, and now he wants to entrust your aunt and you, so I want to ask clearly, it is a matter of nature and righteousness. Unwilling to accept enfeoffment. Qi Shaosheng gritted his teeth. He really wanted to say no forcefully, but he couldn't utter the word. He looked at them with resentment in his eyes, sad and angry at the same time. When did he suffer this insult? When his father was around, he always took him as the eldest son. Qi Ziyuan was not at home all year round. Although the servants in the mansion called him second lord, everyone knew that he would inherit the Qi family's business in the future. Now he has changed from a concubine to a concubine, and anyone can step on their mother and child. Wu woke up faintly, with tears streaming down her face, and said, "Take me to the ancestral hall. I'm going to cry. Master, master, open your eyes and see. Master said he would take care of us for you, but he abused us like this." Wu lay down on the ground and cried, "I know that the uncle doesn't like me as a stepmother, but the second and third masters are uncle's younger brothers. He must not forget the promise he made before the master's bed." The patriarch of the Qi clan asked, "Mrs. Wu, besides my nephew, who else would recognize your wife's identity? You'd better accept it as soon as you see it, and if something happens, no one will be left behind after the events of the past. Your Majesty cares about face, but King Rong is straightforward, and the two uncles of Zhu's family are about to enter Beijing, so you have to think about it." The Wu family cried, and she looked at the patriarch of the Qi clan resentfully, but the patriarch snorted coldly, looked at the four officials, and said, "Have you finished asking the adults what you should ask?" The four nodded repeatedly, and said, I'm done asking, let's go back and answer." But in my heart, I was very curious about the so-called things back then. From what I heard, it seemed that Mr. Qi and Mrs. Wu were very sorry for the emperor and King Rongjun, and they were caught by the Zhu family. It would be gossip in other people's homes, but it's a secret in the royal family, and everyone is curious. Wu's identity was confirmed as a concubine and not a wife. This confirmation has laid the foundation and announced to the world that Qi Feng's main family is only Zhu's, and Wu is a concubine. This was really the result Qi Ziyuan wanted, so he simply named Wu as a concubine without a title, and directly named her natal family's surname. Qi Ziyuan asked her to choose a day to enter the palace. Qi Shaosheng and Qi Saitai sealed two marquises, Marquis of Anil and Marquis of Enping, and the emperor gave them two marquis mansions, and the two marquis mansions are connected, so they can be a family with a door in the middle, which is very convenient. If it was still in the Great Zhou dynasty, the two of them could be named marquis. Even if they died, they would be able to live happily. General Yuan has only been named marquis after more than 20 years of hard work. But now it's the Great Qi dynasty, their eldest brother is sitting on the throne, and their half-brother is the county king, which makes them seem too frivolous as marquis. But they didn't dare to make trouble at this time. Qi Ziyuan's previous attitude was already obvious. The people who were still eager for them are now far away from them, and the Qi mansion is now empty. Because they were disturbed by Qi Ziyuan, they were a little out of spirits and just felt muddled. Some palace servants came to pack their things and said that they were going to move to the Xinhou mansion and the imperial palace. Qi Shaosheng didn't feel it was right until he moved into Xinhou's mansion. He frowned and said, "Where's mother?" Mrs. Wu was exhausted, and moving was a laborious task. Although she didn't need to do it herself, she was so tired that she could hardly move her fingers just by directing. Hearing this, she said, "Didn't mother go to the palace? She is a concubine, and she should be a living concubine in the harem." Qi Shaosheng looked hesitant, and said, "Qi Xiu, the emperor has never liked his mother very much. How could he let his mother live in the harem? Moreover, there are no harem concubines living with their sons in the past dynasties." Speaking of this, Qi Shaosheng became more and more suspicious, and said, "Why would the emperor take mother into the palace? A bad premonition arose in Su's heart, but he forced a smile on his face. After all, the emperor has just ascended the throne, so it's not easy to leave the relationship too clear, so it is possible to let mother live in the palace. Is that so? Qi Shaosheng doubted. Mrs. Su hurriedly got up and said, is it like this or what? All right, let's clean it up quickly. This Ho's mansion is so big, we have a lot of space to take care of. Now our family lives here, but there are 3 people from Qi's mansion. Twice as big. Qi Shaosheng curled his lips in disdain, and said, you only saw our Ho's mansion, which is the county prince's mansion that has never seen the 4th sun. I heard that the previous Qin Xiang's mansion was separated by a few small courtyards. Think about Qin Xiang's mansion, how big is that? The entire foot of Nanping Mountain is covered by Qin Xiangfu. How else could Qi Shaosheng be jealous? Qi Heiran's county mansion alone is 3 times the size of his and his younger brother's 2 marquee mansions combined. Mrs. Su lowered her head and said nothing. Qi Heiran was raised by Qi Ziyuan as his son, how could they compare? But seeing the injustice on her husband's face, Su did not refute. But the Wu family who entered the palace didn't have the heart to think about these things. After being sent to Qingning Palace to be resettled, Wu finally came to her senses. Seeing that the only person familiar with her was Madame Wu, her heart skipped a beat and she hurriedly asked, what about his girl and mother-in-law? Grandma Wu didn't notice anything unusual about Mrs. Wu, she smiled happily and said, why did the concubine forget? We are entering the palace, and those girls and women are naturally staying outside. We have other maids in the palace the female officer serves, and only the servant girl followed you into the palace. Nanny Wu was very happy about this, she thought it was a great honor. Wu Shi felt cold all over her body, this was where Qi Ziyuan had the final say. She vomited a mouthful of blood before, and she was really angry, so she was in a daze. She didn't expect that she would be tricked into the palace if she didn't pay attention. After entering here, wouldn't Qi Ziyuan just let Qi Ziyuan poke the circle and pinch it flat? Wu couldn't help but think of the nanny who was smashed to pieces and shuddered. She said sharply, I don't want to live in the palace, I want to go out, I want to go out and live with my son. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 597. Mother Wu was taken aback, and quickly stepped forward to help her. Twife, what's wrong with you? Wu pinched her fingers into her flesh, gritted his teeth and said, let's go out, he wants my life, he must want my life. Mother Wu was taken aback, and hurriedly looked up at the maids in the room, seeing that they were just packing up their things, as if they didn't hear Wu's words. She lowered her voice and said, Toffee, don't be careless about this. Say, this is in the palace. Wu looked at her in a blink of an eye, and said, since the Emperor and Li have no time to talk to us, let's go quickly, and we don't need anything. Seeing that Nanny Wu was hesitating, she lowered her voice and said, you forgot how Zhu Shi and the 4th child's wet nurse died. Nanny Wu shuddered. Did the emperor want to kill his wife by letting his wife live in the palace? The one who follows his wife. Mama Wu shook her body and said hastily, young maidservant, call Buletin Tuo now. When the talent ran to the gate of the hall, they ran into Qi Ziyuan and Li Shi who were coming towards them. Madame Wu's face turned pale, and she fell to the ground involuntarily. Qi Ziyuan stopped in front of her, and said with a slight smile, Nurse Wu is not here to serve the concubine, why did she come here? Nanny Wu's face was pale, trembling and unable to speak, she could only lie on the ground. She has served Mrs. Wu since she was a child, and she followed Mrs. Wu from the Wu family to the Qi family, from the 2nd-class girl to the 1st-class girl, and then to Mrs. Wu's confidant. Qi Ziyuan's grievances. If it is said that Qi Heiran simply loathes Wu Shi and can't remember it if he doesn't meet him, then the hatred between Qi Ziyuan and Wu Shi can't be wiped away quickly. Who would have thought that a boy who went to the battlefield at the age of 14 not only didn't die on the battlefield, but sat on this supreme position? Li Jinghua felt that Madame Wu's behavior was very strange. She just came to see Wuxi with the emperor. Is it necessary to be so flustered? So I couldn't help but take a second look. Qi Xiaoyuan, on the other hand, went straight past Nanny Wu and entered the palace, and said to the serving maid, "Call your aunt in charge." Aunt Mo, who was watching the things put into the storage, trotted over and knelt down to pay her respects. Qi Xiaoyuan said, "I think Madame Wu is getting old, so don't let her go out to run errands. As for the concubine, you should serve her with all your heart." Qi Xiaoyuan raised his head to meet the eyes of Wuxi, who was sitting on top, smiled slightly, waved his hands and said, "Okay, I have something to say to the queen and the concubine, you go down first." When Li Jinghua heard Qi Xiaoyuan calling her a queen, she was overjoyed, the corners of her mouth turned up slightly, her face softened a lot, and she waved her hand to make people back off. Qi Xiaoyuan didn't want to hide it from Li Jinghua. It's more convenient for her to do the affairs of the harem, besides, he still has a lot of state affairs to deal with, so naturally it is impossible to keep an eye on the harem all the time. Qi Xiaoyuan walked up to Mrs. Wu, carefully looked at her face, only to find that the graceful woman back then had wrinkles around her eyes, her temples were gray, and she was no longer as pitiful as before. Qi Xiaoyuan remembered that when his mother was holding his hand all the way back with her big belly, she stopped on the way to ask him to pick some beautiful flowers and put them on the temples. The cheerful woman asked him with a smile, "Da Lang, mother, does this look good?" He remembered his voice shouting loudly, "It's beautiful, my mother is the most beautiful." At that time, the mother's cheeks were flushed, and then they saw Mrs. Wu leaning against the gate of the courtyard. At that time, she was dressed in white and had a delicate body. She was looking at them with tears in her eyes, and her eyes were full of accusations. He didn't know what happened at the time, but he remembered that his mother's face suddenly sank. Then Mrs. Wu walked up to his mother and knelt down. He no longer remembered what they were talking about. He only knew that his mother was trembling with anger, and her hand that was holding him was painful and numb. Later, she gave birth to a younger brother early, and later he saw the father brought Mrs. Wu over to quarrel with her mother, and the wet nurse said that Qi Feng wanted to mention Mrs. Wu as his equal wife, and only put on the genealogy, not filing in the Yamen. The mother disagreed and gave birth prematurely out of anger. Qi Xiaoyuan will always remember what the wet nurse said when she hugged him and cried. The mother will not die. Although she was born prematurely, she is in good health. It was they who pressed on every step of the way, and made my mother angry to death. At this time, Qi Xiaoyuan was not happy at all looking at Wuxi, who had lost his face. Qi Xiaoyuan stared at Wuxi's face without speaking. Not only Wuxi raised his heart, Li Jinghua also looked at him nervously. In order not to let him do something disrespectful, Li Jinghua took a step forward and held his hand, saying, "Your Majesty, do you have something to say to the concubine?" Qi Xiaoyuan recovered from his memory, lowered his head to meet Wu's eyes, smiled slightly, and said, "Concubine Wu, I came here to tell you that you can live in the palace with peace of mind from now on. If you miss your second and third brothers, tell the queen to let the Queen Xiansu and Xiao Wu come to the palace to see you." Wu muttered, "You want to put me under house arrest?" Li Jinghua's complexion changed drastically, and she looked up at Qi Xiaoyuan. But Qi Xiaoyuan shook his head and said, "Why would I want to put you under house arrest? I also hope that you can live longer, long enough to see all your children and grandchildren grow up." Qi Xiaoyuan smiled slightly, "I want you to see, what kind of future will your children and descendants get because of you? You insisted on marrying my father back then, and tried your best to become an equal wife. Didn't you just want to give the second and third children a higher status so that they can enjoy more resources?" Wu's complexion changed drastically, and he said sharply, "Your Majesty, this is a grievance between the two of us, and it has nothing to do with your younger brothers. Qi Xiaoyuan looked at her coldly and said, the concubine misunderstood, the second and third child are not capable, what can I suppress them? It is not only the second and third child who are bleeding from your body. Mrs. Wu collapsed on the couch. Does this mean that even her grandchildren will not be spared? Don't forget what you promised the master. Qi Xiaoyuan smiled and said, what did I promise my father? Wu Shi choked, and then remembered that Qi Xiaoyuan did not make any promises. Wu Shi took a deep breath, straightened her sleeves, knelt down in front of Qi Xiaoyuan, and cried, Your Majesty, I just beg you to spare the second and third child for the sake of your father's blood. Qi Xiaoyuan's eyes were red, and he said in a low voice, did you ever think about me and my fourth brother when you were mad at my mother? Mrs. Wu kowtowed and said, I am willing to pay my life for my life. Qi Xiaoyuan shook his head, your life is not worth it. I don't want you to die. If you die, it will be easy for the second and third children to be overly sad. Wu Shi, who wanted to seek relief by death, trembled, and did not dare to think of suicide again. Does concubine Wu still remember the wet nurse who abused my brother? Qi Xiaoyuan asked with a smile. Wu's body trembled, she closed her eyes, and said, remember, I sent their whole family far away, and now they don't know where they are now. Qi Xiaoyuan regretted, what a pity, originally I wanted to find their family members and bring them into the palace to accompany you. Qi Xiaoyuan walked around the palace for a while, then tapped the floor and said, the nanny pinched and stabbed my brother back then, and she took off her clothes and threw it on the floor when it was over. He doesn't remember this for a long time, so I don't know how it feels like. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 598. Wu's face was pale, and Qi Xiaoyuan felt that it was almost done, so he turned around and took Li Jinghua out. On the way, Qi Xiaoyuan stopped and said, I remember when I was young, my father didn't like me very much, and all the servants in the house ignored me. Talking to me, every time I opened my mouth, I would sneer at me. For a while, I was very sad. I felt that although I didn't lack food and clothing, I felt that it was better to die. When I went to see Heiran, I saw that kid. I crawled on the ground, hugged my legs and arched them up. I was thinking at the time that my mother was dead, my uncle was far away at the border, and my uncle and aunt were not on good terms. If I died too, my brother would still be able to stay in peace. Are you at Fan's house? Qi Heiran's nose was slightly sour, his eyes were slightly moist, and he said with a low laugh, I feel better now. Later, when I grew up, my uncle made meritorious service at the border and was promoted to an official position. He sent a master to teach me how to practice martial arts. I can often go out walking around, the coldness in my heart has improved a lot. I don't know if the second and third younger brothers can often enter the palace to accompany the concubine when she is in the palace. Li Jinghua shuddered. Qi Xiaoyuan was planning to cut his flesh with a blunt knife, and return what Wu Shi did to him and Qi Heiran back then. Li Jinghua never knew that brother Qi Xiaoyuan lived such a life when he was a child, and he felt complicated for a moment, so he could only reach out and hold his hand. Qi Xiaoyuan looked down, held her hand back, and said with a smile, I was always worried that I would treat Heiran badly after I got married, that kid is so stupid, and listen to other people's bad words as good, but now I see that you and Aling get along well, but I was a fool back then. Your Majesty, Li Jinghua called softly. Qi Xiaoyuan patted her hand and said, you have worked hard all these years, let's put aside the matter of filling the harem for now, and now the national treasury is empty, we will discuss this matter in 2 years. Qi Xiaoyuan said in a low voice, Xiaobao is too young, wait until he is older. Li Jinghua's eyes were slightly wet, She clenched Qi Ziyuan's hand, and murmured, "Your Majesty." She felt that Qi Ziyuan's love for her was worth it in this life. The next day, the palace servants reported that Mrs. Wu had caught a cold and fell ill. Qi Ziyuan just smiled slightly, waved someone to ask for an imperial physician, and then walked slowly to the court. After many years, he was no longer the child who was slaughtered, and Wu's was no longer able to suppress his stepmother. The road ahead is very broad and long, and it is no longer worthwhile for a person like Wu to stop. Qi Ziyuan dealt with some important state affairs in the early court, and then he proposed the canonization of the queen, asked the Ministry of Rites to prepare, and asked Qin Tianjian for a good day. Now that the canonization of the queen was proposed, the matter of filling the harem was also brought up. The officials did not want Qi Ziyuan to be addicted to female sex, but they also did not want him to have only the queen in the harem. Among other things, the matter of the royal family spreading branches and leaves is very important. The emperor didn't say that he would fill up the positions of concubines, at least 5 or 6 more newcomers should be added, right? But Qi Ziyuan clearly refused for the first time in the court hall, saying, "Now the national treasury is empty, and the 2 ceremonies of the new emperor's ascension to the throne and the canonization of the queen have cost a lot. Now the king of Rongjun is still living in the Qi mansion. There is no money to repair it, so let's save some money, and the people will settle down, and it really shouldn't disturb the people." At the moment, some ministers stood up and said that there are daughters of the right age in the family who can enter the palace to serve the emperor and queen, instead of spending money on private drafts. The emperor's complexion sank immediately, and he refused solemnly, saying, "The state of the Great Zhou was chaotic, but it started from Jiaozong. Emperor Sejong was wise all his life, and he once said that the front and rear palaces should be separated, so all concubines should not be from the 4th rank or above. An official's family is elected, and Qing Jin presents his daughter. Is it because he wants to resign and return to his hometown?" The courtier who brought up this matter didn't dare to say anything. He let his daughter enter the palace for the benefit of him and the family, so how could he be willing to give up his official position? Qi Xiu was far from willing to talk about these trivial matters in the early court. In his opinion, taking concubines is just like taking concubines, and it is really not worth mentioning on the stage. As soon as he retreated early in the morning, Qi Ziyuan carried Qi Heiran, who was obviously not awake, to the Shang study, and asked, "What did you do last night?" Qi Heiran scratched his head and said, "Brother, I have been looking at the account books for several days, and found that the logistics is still not working. You have to send me a logistics officer." Qi Ziyuan chuckled lightly, "I let you learn to read the account book to give you one more skill. Don't be fooled by the people below. Who told you to take care of this? You are an eagle in the sky, and you are going to soar into the sky. Yes, that's fine. Since you don't understand it, forget it. I'll send you a teacher later, and you take it with you to the post, and you can ask him more about things other than fighting." Qi Heiran hesitated and said, "Isn't it a military advisor?" Qi Ziyuan smiled and said, "The military advisor is Zijin. That kid is not willing to give up on business, and I can't imprison people by your side, so I will send you another teacher." Qi Heiran's eyes sparkled. "Zijin will go with me." Qi Ziyuan smiled and said, "You are asked to do things, not to play. There are many ethnic groups in Qianan area, and there are also many conflicts. You should be more careful in doing things, and you can't be rampant like before. Xixia wolves have the same ambition, so pay attention to border defense some. As for Dali, these years have been very peaceful, you can stay still." "What about Jingguo?" The grievances between Qi Heiran and Jingguo can be written into a book. He originally wanted to go back to Jingzhou Mansion, but he felt that his elder brother was right. Now there is no usable general in the southwest area. Need to be on guard, not to mention, he hasn't avenged the massacre of the city before. Thinking of the massacre of the Xixia city, Qi Heiran couldn't help but feel cold. Qi Ziyuan turned around and sat down before going back to the case. He took out a booklet and handed it to Qi Heiran, saying, I plan to make General Yuan the Duke of Ding and Shen Mu the Marquis of Huailiang, so that they can guard the border with peace of mind. As for the 3 houses of Jingzhou Mansion, then leave it to your father-in-law, he is still stationed in Tongchuan Mansion, I will let Zhang Ziyi replace him and let him return to Jingzhou Mansion. Qi Ziyuan sighed, in this way, Aling may not be able to meet her father, so you can tell her for me later. Although Qi Heiran regretted it, he also knew that a pass like Jingzhou Mansion could not be separated from people for a day. This time you go to Qianan, I don't plan to let you take the old army with you, take all the bandit troops you have recruited, and leave the generals for me, and bring the bandit leaders with you. Qi Heiran pouted and said, Brother, all my subordinates are rookies and rebellious bandits, won't I be beaten up if I go to the southwest like this? Qi Ziyuan patted him on the shoulder and said, No way, those who are capable will work harder. You are very talented in military training, so I will work harder for your elder brother. I will scatter the generals you brought out all over Dakigo, they will guard our Daki's land. Qi Ziyuan's eyes sparkled, he found the map, opened it on the table, and pointed, Look. The Reborn Wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 599. Qi Heiran took a step forward, his eyes lit up when he saw the defense above. Brother, do you want to change the defense pattern? Qi Ziyuan nodded, this is my idea in the early years. Now that I have the opportunity, I will naturally implement it. In the early days, I didn't understand why Jiaozong deployed his troops inside, resulting in a situation of being lenient on the outside and strict on the inside. Later, Jingguo and Zixia only moved slightly. Dali even dared to break away from self-reliance without even saying a word. This time, the second prince rebelled, and wars broke out in various places in Dazhu. Many generals took the lead in raising the flag of rebellion. On the contrary, it was the soldiers stationed at the border. Few of them followed the rebellion. Therefore, I decided to deploy most of the soldiers at the border, leaving only a small number in the prefectures to respond. How do you feel about keeping enough soldiers? Qi Heiran nodded like a chicken pecking rice, his eyes sparkled, Brother, let's do this. Qi Ziyuan patted him on the shoulder and said, That's why I want you to train those recruited bandits. Although those bandit leaders are rebellious, they can survive in the troubled times. They have their own abilities. Military system reform, frontier defense needs a lot of garrison generals, and the ones you brought before can all be on their own. So Qi Ziyuan wants to transfer those people to the border, or serve as deputy, or lead an army alone, but the reform of the military system is more difficult. Even if their brothers now hold most of the military power, they have to plan it slowly. Qi Ziyuan's goal is not only the army in his hands, but also Yuan's army, Zhu's army, etc. In the future, he will make these armies belong to Qi instead of belonging to a single family. Qi Ziyuan didn't dare to reveal his ambition at this time, so he could only tell his brother. This is also in line with Qi Heiran's wishes. Qi Ziyuan is now the emperor, he can no longer personally manage all the troops and train generals, so he can only put the burden on Qi Heiran's shoulders. Qi Heiran assured him, Brother, don't worry, in the future our army will only fight for Qi, and fight for the common people, and will no longer fight for one person or one clan alone. With bright eyes, Qi Ziyuan patted Qi Heiran's shoulder with his big palm, and said with a loud smile, Good brother. Of course, such a big plan cannot be carried out by only the two brothers, but there are too few people who can be completely trusted now. Qi Ziyuan and Qi Heiran discussed it, and said, I can mention this to Rongxian and Zijin in advance. On Rongxuan's side, Qi Ziyuan went to talk, and on Fan Zijin's side, Qi Heiran went to talk. When Rongxian heard Qi Ziyuan's plan, he said, No, Your Majesty, in this way, nearly half of Daki's generals will be under the name of King Rongjun. If the military power falls to the outside, I'm afraid there will be another chaos. Qi Xiaoyuan smiled and said, I know Jinyu's worry, but it's superfluous on Heiran's side. The people he cultivated know him, and they must know me, but Da Qi is the first to know, and what they want to listen to it is my order. Rong Xian frowned. The king of Rongjun is indeed innocent now, but can the sage guarantee that 10 or 20 years later, the king of Rongjun will still be the same as before? Qi Xiaoyuan sighed, I can't guarantee it, but he is the younger brother I brought up with one hand. I am willing to trust him and take a gamble. Why don't Jinyu wait and see? Rong Xian was silent for a long time, struggling in his heart until his calf went numb, and then sighed, since the emperor has made a decision, I will not say much, but I still have a question. Rong Xian looked up at Qi Xiaoyuan, and asked, if the emperor ascends the throne after 100 years, what should the king of Rongjun do? Is it to be a good Bao, or a high-skilled master? Qi Xiaoyuan lightly clenched his hands into fists, and said, I don't need to tell you, Heiran will have a choice. Why doesn't Jinyu have more confidence in him? Power makes people lose heart. I'm afraid no one will be able to remind King Rongjun when the time comes, Rong Xian said vaguely. Mr. An is clever and cunning, and he has a deep brotherly relationship with King Rongjun. When the time comes, the new emperor will care about the emperor and King Rongjun. Brotherhood of. Qi Xiaoyuan smiled softly, Jinyu is so convinced that I will definitely walk ahead of Heiran. Rong Xian's complexion changed drastically, and he knelt down to plead guilty, I deserve death for my crimes. Don't, I'm joking with you. Qi Xiaoyuan hastily walked down and pulled him up, shaking his head and said, You have become more reserved recently, and when I told you these things before, you would still roll my eyes. But now that his identities are so different, how could he dare to be so presumptuous? Rong Xian lowered his head, the corners of his mouth twitched, he opened his mouth, but he still didn't open his mouth to refute. Qi Xiaoyuan said, I know you are worried about Zijin taking power. If Heiran loses his heart at that time, they will definitely have a fight with Xiaobao. I don't want to see this. Qi Xiaoyuan paused and said, that's why Heiran was not forced to take a concubine. Rong Xian raised his eyebrows, Qi Xiaoyuan smiled and said, you have seen that child, Aling, what do you think of her? Rong Xian said with a smile, it looks bold, but it is also cautious enough, but it also values love and righteousness. Qi Xiaoyuan nodded, I'm very relieved to have her looking at Heiran. He already had 90% confidence in his younger brother, and with Mu Yangling's supervision, 90% became 99% and the remaining little one he felt it was worth the risk. Qi Xiaoyuan thinks that he is very accurate in judging people. If you want to say who doesn't want their brothers to fight each other, apart from him and Heiran, Mu Yangling must be the third person. She has the right mind, the key is that she can still subdue Qi Heiran. As for Fan Zijin, it's not that he doesn't have confidence in this cousin, but that if he fights with Heiran, although this kid is entangled and sad, he will definitely stand by Heiran's side to help make suggestions. That kid looks smart, but he always follows Heiran in major matters, often Heiran sets the direction and goal, and then this kid makes suggestions and instructs Heiran to go forward. For example, rebellion. At the beginning when he said that he wanted to rebel, Heiran only mentioned it, and he didn't even get entangled, he put his head down and did it with them. So Qi Xiaoyuan felt that if one day Heiran wanted to fight for power, Zijin would definitely stand by his side and help make suggestions. This kid doesn't have much bottom line, so Heiran can subdue him, and if he can subdue Heiran, Mu Yangling counts as one. Seeing that Qi Xiaoyuan had already made up his mind, Rong Xian couldn't persuade him anymore, otherwise it would appear that he was trying to provoke their brotherhood. Qi Heiran asked Fan Zijin to shut him in the study and told him the goal plan. Fan Zijin's first reaction was to frown and ask, Big cousin entrusted you with such an important matter, what if he suspects you in the future? You know that's the case. Doing it means that half of the generals of Daki will be born under your hands, which is equivalent to you controlling half of Daki. Can big cousin tolerate it? Xiaobao can rest assured of your high-ranking uncle in the future. The reborn wife is farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 600. As soon as Fan Zijin opened his mouth, the intimacy and distance became apparent. Rong Xian and Qi Ziyuan have been friends for many years, and they are compatible with each other, so he considers the issue from Qi Ziyuan's interests. Fan Zijin and Qi Heiran grew up together as brothers, so he subconsciously protected Qi Heiran's interests. Qi Heiran didn't think about it so much, and waved his hand indifferently after hearing the words, "Brother believes me, and I'm not training my own private army. Although those people want to train under my hands, they are loyal to Dachi and Big Brother. If they can't even tell the priority, then I won't use them." As he said, what he wants to build is an army loyal to Dachi and the Emperor Dachi, not a private army. If the people under him value him more than the country, he will definitely not let anyone serve as a general of Dachi, but it is possible except as a master general, but what future can the other party have in that way? He also wanted to set an example first, so that Yuan's army would become Dachi's army, instead of an army that only obeyed General Yuan's orders as it is now. Qi Heiran came to find Fan Zijin one more thing. He twitched a bit, and whispered flatteringly, "Cousin, I have something to ask you." Fan Zijin shuddered, shaking his shoulders and said, "Don't call me cousin, it's definitely not good if you call me that." Qi Heiran smiled flatteringly and said, "Even if I don't call you, you are also my cousin." If it weren't for the fact that they were separated by a table, Fan Zijin would definitely believe that Qi Heiran would rush up to squeeze his legs and shoulders. He rubbed his forehead and asked, "What's the matter?" Qi Heiran immediately sat up straight and asked, "Are you going to set off with me, or will you leave later?" Fan Zijin rolled his eyes at him, and said, "I am your military advisor, so naturally I set off with you." "What about my cousin?" Qi Heiran immediately asked, "Why is she leaving?" Fan Zijin was taken aback, and asked, "Where is she going?" "Go to Qianan, let's set up camp first. When will the cousin leave, and then let Aling and the child go with her?" Qi Heiran said flatteringly, "I know you have a specially built carriage, which is very comfortable. It's a long way to Qianan. I'm afraid the child won't get used to it, so how about letting Aling take the child with his cousin?" Fan Zijin lowered his face, and said, "Who said Xiao Xia is going to Qianan?" Qi Heiran blinked, "She won't go to Qianan? Our visit lasts at least 4 or 5 years, and at most 7 or 8 years. My mother is still at home, and there is always someone to take care of me." Fan Zijin paused and said, "Aling shouldn't go, it's so inconvenient to take this child. What if something happens along the way? Why don't you pay me, take a concubine?" Qi Heiran jumped up and said, "Don't talk nonsense, I don't have the intention of taking a concubine. If Aling hears it, I won't be able to clean it up by jumping into the Yellow River." Fan Zijin was so angry that he kicked him. "You are so afraid of guilt, what does she say? Do you think there is no 1 or 2 concubines in the backyard?" Qi Heiran said solemnly, "Zijin, we have all suffered from concubines. I don't want Xiaoxiang to suffer like us in the future, and I don't want Aling to be sad. You can't bring up such things as concubines gone." Fan Zijin snorted softly, and said, "Are we the kind of idiots who spoil concubines and kill wives?" Fan Zijin didn't think he would spoil concubines and kill wives, let alone discriminate between concubines and concubines, so he didn't reject such things as taking concubines. Because he looks down on concubines from the bottom of his heart. How could he fall in love with that humble woman? But seeing that Qi Heiran was so nervous, he snorted softly. Qi Heiran and his wife had no experience in fighting in the back house. If they really wanted to arrange a concubine's room between them, I'm afraid something would happen. As for why he keeps mentioning it, needless to say, he is happy to see Qi Heiran jumping. Fan Zijian tortured Chi Hao before he let go and said, "Okay, isn't it just a carriage, and I'll leave it to her when the time comes." Chi Haoran was satisfied, and began to care about his good friend's private life. "You really don't have a cousin? You don't have a son-in-law yet? It's been too long since you've been separated this time. My aunt is in good health now. Let her come back in a few years as soon as possible. Filial piety, is it?" Fan Zijian frowned, thinking deeply. Chi Haoran said, "Even if you say you won't spoil concubines and destroy wives, and you won't discriminate between concubines and concubines, but if she can't give birth to the eldest son, the servants in the mansion will praise her and step down, which will have some influence. Isn't my aunt back then, so you have suffered so much?" Fan Zijian's face changed slightly, and he said viciously, "Mother is like that because that person is partial." Chi Haoran nodded, "But if you are the eldest son, and your aunt consolidates her position early, life will definitely be much easier." Fan Zijian changed his mind in an instant. What Haoran said was right. He didn't think about Xiao Xia, but also about his legitimate son and daughter. After Qi Ziyuan officially appointed him as Qi Haoran's military advisor, Fan Zijian expressed at the dinner table that he would take Xiao Xia to Qianan with him. Xiao Xia looked up at Fan Zijian in surprise. Her eyes were reddish. Seeing this, Fan Zijian was even more determined. Xiaoxi just froze for a moment, then nodded and said, "That's fine, you are still newlyweds, it's really not easy to separate, your father and I are still in good health, so you don't need to worry about it, but the disappointment in my heart couldn't be concealed." In the past 2 years, the Xia family felt more and more that Fan Zijian was estranged from her, and the daughter-in-law also left the capital, so she might become even more estranged in the future. Fan Siwen obviously thought so too, so he lowered his face and said, "It's better for Xiao Xia to stay with your mother and let your mother take care of you with a concubine." Fan Zijian originally only had 8 points of persistence, but now it has become 10 points. His face sank, and he sneered and said, "My eldest son is not born yet, so he has no intention of taking concubines. As for the matter of being filial to you and mother, elder brother, and if the third and fourth brothers are not at home, let them take care of my parents for a few years on my behalf." Anger flashed across Fan Siwen's face. He dropped his chopsticks with a snap, and asked, "Are you blaming me?" Fan Zijian asked in amazement, "What do you think father said?" Everyone could hear the complaint in Fan Zijian's words, and the look of surprise on his face was so fake that anyone with eyes could know that he did it on purpose. Fan Siwen was so angry that her chest heaved, and she turned her head to look at Xiaoxi. In the past, Xiaoxi would get up early to stop the father and son, but today she was a little tired, with a dazed expression, turning a blind eye to the conflict between the two. The Fan Zixiao brothers even buried their heads in their chests, not daring to say a word. Even Fan Zixiao, who used to provoke Fan Zijian, was honest, let alone other bastards who didn't have much sense of existence. Fan Zijian is a cousin of today, and is as close as a brother to King Rongjun. Everyone knows that his current favor is second only to King Rongjun, one of the only dukes of the Great Qi. How dare Fan Zixiao go to him again? Jumping forward. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 601. Even Fan Siwen was much gentler to Fan Zijian because he was made Duke of the State. Of course, this was the feeling of everyone except Fan Zijian. Fan Siwen really wanted to ease the relationship between father and son, but every time he met the son, he couldn't help but get angry. He was lucky, seeing that Mrsya didn't open her mouth to leave Mrsya, he waved his hand slightly annoyed. "Whatever you want, your wings are hardened now, how can you listen to your parents?" Fan Zijian snorted softly, but did not refute, which instead made Fan Siwen's face even more angry. If it were someone else's son, he would have knelt down and confessed his guilt in fear. I couldn't finish the meal, so I simply pushed the bowl and chopsticks and got up to leave. Fan Zijan lost his appetite, so he stood up, and seeing Mrsya still sitting, he said, "Not full yet? Serve me back to the room." Mrsya hurriedly stood up and saluted Mrsya, then chased after Fan Zijan. Since Fan Siwen mentioned the matter of taking concubines, Xioxia's face has turned extremely pale. She has been married into Fan's family for more than a year, but she has no children so far. She is usually most worried about the issue of taking concubines. When she hears that Fan Zijan refuses, her complexion slightly improved. She chased the man back into the house, and Fan Zijan waved his hand. "Tomorrow, go to the Chi mansion to find Mrs. Mu, and ask her when you will leave, and let her teach you what to pack." Xiaoxia asked softly, "Isn't the concubine going with the Duke?" She was a little afraid that she would be detained. "Qianan has just quelled the war, and there is not even a camp. Where did you go to live? We will go and settle you down before you start. Walk slowly on the road, and you will be able to settle down when you arrive." Seeing Xioxia's face worried, he said, "Don't worry, when the time comes, I'll tell Mrs. Mu that she won't leave what you don't take." Xiaoxia wanted to cry, but she was not afraid that Mu Yangling would not take her there, but because she was afraid that her in-laws would arrest her, so she would send Fan Zijan to a concubine's room. "Okay." But Xiaoxia didn't dare to say such words, and could only bury her worries in her heart. Qi Heiran has already set a time for departure, and Mu Yangling is packing his things for him. When Qi Heiran came back and saw 5 large boxes of things in the house, he pinched his waist arrogantly and said, "Master is here for military training, not for an outing. Why take so many things? Take it away, take it all away." Mu Yangling also felt that it was a bit too much, but he felt that everything was essential, so he took out some clothes and boots and stuffed them in again, saying, "You are too lazy, you always don't take a bath to change clothes. After wearing it for a few days, I threw away the clothes. I specially prepared 2 boxes of clothes for you, and I can't reduce it anymore. Here are medicinal materials. Qianan is full of miasma and poisonous insects, and it is remote. Many medicinal materials are not available. I wear it on the road just in case." Mu Yangling got up and squeezed the little baby fat that Qi Heiran had just raised, and said regretfully, "It's hard to put on a little fat, and I'm going to lose weight again." What Qi Heiran was most dissatisfied with was the fat baby on his face. Hearing this, he poured out most of the contents of the 5 boxes in anger, and commanded Li Shun domineeringly, "These things are neat and tidy, and I just take these." Mu Yangling pinched his waist and said, "It's not a rush march, and you don't have to carry it yourself. What's wrong with tying it to the carriage? When you feel uncomfortable, it's not me who feels distressed." Qi Heiran stared and roared, "You just want to see these 2 pieces of meat on Grandpa's face. Don't think that Grandpa doesn't know, when I sleep at night, he always pinches my face while I'm asleep." Mu Yangling hesitated, turned his head and looked around, and saw that there were only 2 people in the room, and the girl and mother-in-law had backed away when they disagreed, so she was relieved, rushed forward and pinched the fleshy face on his face. "Why are you yelling out everything?" Mu Yangling's face was blushing. Qi Heiran's heart skipped a beat when he saw it. He grabbed Mu Yangling's hand, and hummed, "My lord is telling the truth." As he spoke, he leaned over to kiss her. Mu Yangling didn't expect that he still had such thoughts at this time, and when he moved his elbow, Qi Heiran quickly grasped his chest with his hand, so that he didn't get hit, but his palm also hurt, and he was a little dissatisfied. Mu Yangling glared at him and said, "Preaching prostitution in the daytime. It's not like I haven't." Qi Heiran muttered in a low voice. Seeing Mu Yangling blushing and glaring at him angrily, Qi Heiran's heart became more itchy. Bian said, "Master will leave in 2 days, I don't know when we can meet again." Speaking of this, Chi-Heiran was a little dissatisfied. He felt that it was his son who dragged them down. If he didn't have a son, Mu Yangling could have walked with him on horseback with a sword. He put his arms around Mu Yangling's waist, hugged her from behind, and rested his chin on her shoulder a little bit disappointed. Mu Yangling rubbed his hair and said, "How long will it be? We will leave after you set off for 1 month, and we will move slowly on the road, and we will arrive in Canaan in 1 month, but we will be separated for 2 months, and we will leave the same as before. 1 year is fine." Mu Yangling felt that Chi-Heiran's hand on her waist was like burning coals. She held his hand and pulled it out slightly uncomfortably, then pushed him and said, "It's fine if you don't want to bring so many things. I'll take it with you when Bear goes." Chi-Heiran tightly held Mu Yangling's waist, tilted his head and bit her earlobe, and said in a low voice, "Let's add a younger brother to Little Bear." The hot air was blowing on his neck, and his earlobes were slightly numb. Mu Yangling lost his mind for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he was already pressed on the couch, and his clothes were ripped open. Mu Yangling blushed, pushed him, and said in a low voice, "The girls are all outside, it's broad daylight." The rest of the words were swallowed by Chi-Heiran, and he expressed his determination with practical actions. Mu Yangling was tossed and tossed twice by Chi-Heiran, and when she woke up, it was already dark outside, and she moved with a slightly sore body. He turned his head to look outside. Chi-Heiran came in with a bowl of noodles, and when he saw her eyes open, he showed a big smile. "I asked the kitchen to serve you a bowl of noodles, get up and eat." Mu Yangling lay on the bed and put on a dress for himself, muttering and asking, "How do you know I'm waking up now? The noodles under the noodles will clump up early." Chi-Heiran proudly said, "I knew it." Mu Yangling turned his head to look at the luggage outside, and saw that the things that Chi-Heiran had scattered on the ground had long since disappeared, and a smear of rosy clouds appeared on his face, thinking that everyone must know about it. Mu Yangling glared at Chi-Heiran, then took the bowl and began to eat slowly. The noodle soup is made from the old hen soup without oil, and there are 2 eggs in it. This is the extra meal she often ate before she was pregnant. Mu Yangling thought that the things outside were packed by Li Shun and the others, but when he got dressed and came out, he found that the things were piled up on the table and chairs. Chi-Heiran scratched his head, and said, "I originally wanted to ask Li Shun and the others to come in and clean up, but they moved heavily and made too much noise. I was worried that they would not let them move if they woke you up, but it's not good to throw things on the ground. I'll just put it here, don't be angry, I'll ask them to come in and clean up." Mu Yangling held his hand with a smile, and said with a smile, "I'm not angry." The Reborn Wife is Farming. Author, Yu Yuzu. Chapter 602. As soon as Chi-Heiran left, there were only Mu Yangling, mother and son in the Chi manor. Because his father left, Xiao Xiang was a little sleepy all day long, sitting with his head down and not talking. Mu Yangling kissed his little cheek, and coaxed, "My dear, we will see daddy in 2 months, soon." Little Xiang moved his body and turned his face away to ignore her. He vaguely knew in his heart that if he went to see his father, he would be separated from his elder brother, and if he wanted to enter the palace to play with his elder brother, he would be separated from his parents. The little bear is already getting tangled up. Mu Yangling was always unhappy seeing him, so he had no choice but to carry him into the palace to find Xiaobao to play with. When Li Jinghua saw her, he waved and smiled and said, "If you don't come, I'm going to have someone call you. Come and help me take care of the child." Little Bear had already slid down from his mother's arms and rushed up to join Xiaobao. Li Jinghua breathed a sigh of relief, and said, "I don't know what's wrong with this child these days, she always cries at night, even if she calls the imperial doctor, she can't figure out why, and her spirit is not good during the day." Mu Yangling touched the heads of the 2 of them. "Could it be that you know that Bear is leaving? I told him earlier that even though there was a quarrel for 2 days at the beginning, I forgot about it afterwards. Li Jinghua paused and said, it is estimated that the recent movement in the palace has shocked him, and you know that these children have been weak since they were young, and they would be startled whenever there was any noise. Li Jinghua pulled Mu Yangling's hand and said, I want to talk to the emperor. Why don't you let him stay with you for a few days first, and I will take him into the palace after the busy work in the palace is over. Li Jinghua's queen's conferment ceremony is about to be held, and many abandoned palaces in the harem also need to be cleaned and repaired. Although there is not much movement, the people coming and going are indeed a bit noisy, and Xiaobao is used to running with Xiaoxiang again, every day. Running around with short legs, the harem is empty, not necessarily because of being frightened by something. Li Jinghua only had such a son, so she couldn't be more nervous. She was slightly embarrassed and said, you have to start packing now, and I will trouble you at this time. Mu Yangling smiled and said, Wang Malishun and the others will worry about packing things, I just watch from the sidelines. She glanced at Xiaobao's slightly pale face, and said, then I will ring the bell and bring him back. Li Jinghua was happy, and quickly asked someone to pack Xiaobao's things. Li Jinghua was indeed very busy. Sitting in Cunning Palace, Mu Yangling saw a lot of palace people coming and going, either reporting things or asking for instructions. Mu Yangling looked at it for a while, then got up and said, sister-in-law, then you do your work first, I will take Xiaobao and Xiaoxiang outside for a walk. Li Jinghua nodded and asked the female officer beside her to follow. Mu Yangling leaned down and picked up a child with one hand, and put it down in a quiet place in the royal garden. She wiped the sweat from Little Bear's forehead, and seeing that there was no sweat on Xiaobao's forehead, she patted his back, sighed, no wonder your mother is worried about you. It's a hot day, but she doesn't sweat at all. Mu Yangling put the man on his knees, and seeing him with his head down, he asked, Xiaobao, can you tell auntie what's wrong? Xiaobao is very smart. He looked up at Mu Yangling, then lowered his head and said nothing. The little bear stood on the side gesticulating and yelled wow, looking very indignant. Mu Yangling looked at his son for a while, and asked Xiaobao tentatively, Xiaobao is scared at night and can't sleep. Xiaobao almost buried his head in Mu Yangling's arms. Mu Yangling understood, laughed lightly, patted him on the back softly and said, what are you afraid of? Bear sleeps alone at night. Xiaobao complained aggrievedly, my brother slept with his uncle and aunt. The aunt obviously lied to him. But Xiaoxiang clenched his fist angrily and said wow twice, but Xiaobao insisted on his own, saying, little Xiang sleeps in the warm pavilion, and he shares a room with his uncle and aunt, and I live alone in a palace. When Xiaobao said this, his eyes were full of tears. He was a child who slept lightly and thoughtful, and the harem was an unfamiliar environment. It was okay to be accompanied by the little bear. Without the company of the little bear, he would always wake up at night. The entire palace was empty. When I turned my head to look outside, there was still the sound of the trees being blown by the wind, and the shadows of the lights. When Mu Yangling saw him complaining about his fear in a low voice, she felt distressed. When she was a child, she couldn't sleep at night and opened her eyes to look out of the window. She also liked to think wildly and be afraid, but at that time she slept with her father and was afraid it's also only temporary. She patted him on the back and said, it's okay, Xiaobao and his aunt, as well as his father and mother, we will help you drive away the bad guys together. Once you know the reason, you will have an idea to treat it. Back in the Qi mansion in the afternoon, Mu Yangling asked the kitchen to make the two children's favorite food, coaxed them to eat a lot, and took them back to the house to play and digest. Perhaps because he returned to a familiar environment, the room was not as spacious as the palace, and he was surrounded by people he was familiar with. The paleness on Xiaobao's face faded a little. At night, she didn't send the two children to Nuan Pavilion, but put them on her own bed. Seeing Xiaobao looking at her with bright eyes, Mu Yangling smiled and said, Auntie will sleep with you today. Not only Xiaobao, but also Xiaoxiang cheered happily, stripped off his clothes, and slipped into the quilt with a sharp sound. Mu Yangling twitched the corner of his mouth, stretched out his hand and patted his buttocks and said, "Get up and put on your underwear, how can you sleep naked?" The little bear was not happy and lay still. Mu Yangling had a headache, and the kid didn't know what was going on, he just didn't like to sleep with his clothes on, and sometimes he would get up by himself and take off his pants in the middle of the night. Seeing this, Xiaobao also took off his clothes, and got into the quilt naked. At this time, the two children were not ashamed, so they did whatever they felt comfortable with. Xiaobao explained on behalf of Xiaoxiang, "Auntie, it's comfortable to take off naked." Little Xiang nodded again, and finally took a look at the clothes in disgust. Mu Yangling had no choice but to let them do this. He woke up twice at night to see if the two children were covered with quilts. Although it is a hot day, Linen City is a water town, and the city is densely covered with water, so the temperature at night it's not very high, and you need to cover it with a thin quilt. Little Bear was already sleeping sideways, but Little Treasure shrank to the side, very well behaved. Mu Yangling only glanced at them, and seeing that the quilt was still covering them, he turned around and fell asleep again. When the busy work in the palace came to an end, when Mu Yangling brought Xiaobao into the palace, Xiaobao's face was already rosy. Li Jinghua was relieved to see him. Always worried. Mu Yangling asked people to take the two children down to play, so he dragged Li Jinghua into the inner room and whispered about Xiaobao's fear, saying, "Sister-in-law, why don't you take Xiaobao to sleep together at night, when he wakes up and sees you'll be at ease?" Li Jinghua's face turned red, hesitantly said, "I'm afraid the emperor will blame him. Now the emperor stays with her almost every night, it would definitely be inconvenient to keep his son here."